Hi, welcome to Connections. My name is Stacy Levine Lavely, and this is my son, Jagger Lavely. He is the inspiration behind this show. Jagger has autism, and as we started his journey as a young child, I knew nothing about this world, and as he gets older, I learn more and more each and every day on this journey. So I want to take you along on the journey with us. We're going to be talking about resources, we're going to be talking about community, housing, we're talking about jobs, we're going to be talking about therapies, services, inspirational people in this community, and so much more. So we look forward to you joining us on this journey, and we're trying to create unity in the community.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Connections. My guests today are two financial professionals from the Moody Street Group in Newton, Massachusetts, who have a passion for helping and supporting families and organizations in the special needs community. Tom Alessi is an investment advisor with more than 21 years of experience. He lives in Westwood with his wife and two daughters. Tom enjoys golf, reading, and watching the occasional bad movie, don't we all? And Craig Richardson is a financial representative with more than 10 years experience. Craig lives in Webster, close by us, with his wife and two daughters. He is an avid hunter who also enjoys spending time with his family. And I'm going to turn everything over to them today. They're going to be talking about special needs, financial information, planning, and things like that. So we're really, really excited to have you guys. So welcome, Craig and Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stacy. We certainly appreciate it, and we're very excited to be here today and to share this with your audience. I am going to pull up my screen here. As Stacy said, a part of this is Craig and I. This presentation comes along with part of the firm that we work for dedicates a section to helping families with a child who has special needs. We deem it as the Special Needs Resource Network. And the Special Needs Resource Network is really intended to try to connect as many organizations, advocates, and other professionals together to help support and work with those families. What we're doing today is, as Stacy said, we're gonna talk a little bit about sort of a step-by-step overview, a guide for families for parenting with a child with special needs. Stacy did a tremendous introduction for us. I will say this, that occasional bad movie thing is according to my wife. That's where that comes from. So, that's a direct quote from her. But as Stacy said, Tom and Craig, we are coming to you as part of this. I've been doing this for 21 years. Craig, who'll come on a little later in the presentation, has been doing this for 16 years. We're both very passionate about dealing with this and trying to help and be a support for those families with a child who has special needs. Some of our disclosures with this, I will tell you, one of the things that we had mentioned and how we had met Stacy is Craig and I founded a nonprofit organization called the Aries Foundation for Financial Education, Inc., which is entirely focused on promoting and presenting these opportunities, these educational workshops for families as far as what we do. Just, a little bit info on that is that the Aries Foundation is a nonprofit. We're not affiliated with any broker-dealer or securities-related firm. We're not a registered investment advisor. One of the things that we recommend to everybody is if you have questions or concerns of tax, legal, or financial, that you seek out the help of a professional. And as I said, we launched this foundation really to help us through what we do, trying to do these educational workshops, trying to support a family with a child who has special needs. You can visit the website. It's www.ariesfoundation.org. Learn a little bit more about what we do and how we do it and some of the different workshops that we have available. All right, so jumping into this, sorry, that took a little bit longer than I anticipated, but we do like to get that out of the way. So, for today's agenda really, as we talked about, it's a little bit on introduction. We'll go over some expenses, those government benefits, right? We'll break that down a little bit, talk about special needs trusts and ABLE accounts, and then I'll turn it over to Craig, and Craig will pick up on life insurance and funding and how assets work. some advanced directives, and one of the most important things that we think is caring for the caregiver in dealing with everything. So let's face it, raising a child, any child, is challenging, but once you start adding in whether disability, whether that's severe, mild, or complex, it gets much more difficult. There's more than 20 million individuals in the U.S. with a disability, and a lot of this, and Stacy, the conversation that we've had on this has been, that sort of fact gathering and informational gathering on the path and the journey. Everybody's sort of moving along the same avenue or the same path. It's just they're taking different tracks and different ways of getting there. And that's really what this is about, is really trying to help them sort of see and understand the different ways and all the different facts and information that they can sort of gather and how to get it, right?
Exactly, because everybody has a different support system, and depending on what that looks like, this is where it's going to really, the rubber meets the road as far as which direction you really need to go in. And this is just a wonderful thing. Like Tom was saying, he met me because I went to one of their onlines, and I just fell in love with what they were saying. I think it's so important to really know what your avenues are. Like Tom and Craig will both tell you, you always want to consult a professional, but these guys are great at what they do, and it's really going to help you crystallize what you want to do, and they may even have a surprise for you at the end of this.
Certainly appreciate that. Thank you, Stacy. Yeah, that's absolutely it. And one of the things with that is, let's face it, like I said, right now there's roughly, it's 20% of the population. It's like more than 24 million people right now in the U.S. are diagnosed with a disability. All right. But, one of those things is that those fewer and fewer of those disabilities, those diagnoses, are life-threatening today, right? The individuals are living much longer. And in the case of that, the most circumstances that most of them are outliving their parents, right? Now, what that means is that the parent must really consider and think about future funding, right? That is the big concern. And we'll go through a lot of this and talk about the different ways that you can do that and thinking about it. But that is one of the concerns, and we talk about costs with this when you start looking at it out over a lifetime. That little number there on the chart says, hey, a typical child, right? The cost is $245,000 over a lifetime. Now, as Stacy said, Craig and I both have teenage daughters. I don't think that took into consideration teenage daughters when we're $245,000, but that's a different conversation. But you can see a child with autism, we're talking about 1.4 million. Child who has intellectual disabilities, it gets much more substantial from there. And it's whatever the circumstances, there are resources that are available, like Stacy just talked about, in different ways to navigate, to set up and have that security and peace of mind in place. That's really what this is about. So Greg and I always talk about, what we consider those typical expenses. So think of this as, and Stacy, we sort of had this conversation, how do you plan, the calculator, or, how do you set that up and think of it from a beneficiary standpoint? Well, think of some of the expenses you're dealing with today, right? You're not going to have schooling later on in life, like when the child is an adult, but transportation needs, nursing care, therapy, medical copay, medical equipment, assisted technology, absolutely. All of those are a consideration and something that needs to be thought about from a parent's point of view for down the road. Mm-hmm. What am I going to do? How am I going to make sure that the money's going to be there for the individual? And that's really what it's about. So when we talk about all of this, we talk about the government benefits to start. That's what all of this sort of gets based on as it begins with. And we're going to look at them real quick. We're not going to do a deep dive into each of these benefits. I will say that I'll tell you after, once we go over this. But so we have Medicaid, right? So Medicaid, federal program funded at the state level. We're here in Massachusetts. That's Mass Health as far as Medicaid is concerned, right? You got to qualify for Medicaid. It's means tested. Means tested means that there's only a certain criteria allowed as far as the amount of assets and income to qualify for Medicaid. That's the whole point with the Medicaid program. The one that you're going to see most often in dealing with it is SSI. That's the Supplemental Security Income, which basically provides a monthly benefit, helps with basic needs, food, shelter, that type of thing. Again, it's means tested. You've got to qualify and have pretty much no assets, very, very limited in terms of the asset amount, and limited resources. There can be really no income coming in. Mm-hmm. The last one is SSD, that's Social Security Disability Income. Really applies when you're talking about adults. If the individual, had a parent who is already collecting Social Security, or had a parent that was passed away, then would be eligible for those SSDI benefits. That's really where that comes into play as far as there are 3 programs. These are generally looked at as sort of the base for that. And then, from there, you're sort of filling in on your own. And that's what Craig and I will be talking about a little bit here. I will say one of the things with these benefit programs, it's on the parents, as we talk about, to sort of fill in and, help, with the individual, but then also how do you keep getting the benefits without disqualifying the individual? We talk about that, and we'll go through that in a little bit. But one of the things we do have available is we do have it's sort of a guidebook. We call it a roadmap to government benefits that is available. So if you ever, at the end, when I give our contact information, if anybody ever wants to get a hold of that roadmap, we're happy to send it out to you. It's simple and just goes through and breaks down each one of these and some other housing and other ways, how do you file, where do you file, that type of information. So that's all available there. All right, so that slides us into, how do you plan, right? How do you make that available? And we, one of the most common is with a special needs trust. And there's 2 different types of trusts. You have a first party and a third party. This one talks about the third party because it really is the most common. But if you just back it up a little bit, and I know Stacy's going to have us on again to do another presentation where we're going to do a much deeper dive into the different types of trust and the second part of what I'm going to talk about, which is able accounts. But in the case of the difference, if you're just thinking of it from the first party versus a third party, it really is about who's putting the money in. So in the case of a first party, the individual, the person with the disability, is funding the money into the trust. In the case of a third party trust, it's everybody else. Parents, grandparents, siblings, whoever. They're third parties, they're funding the money into the trust. That's why it's a third party trust. The third party trust really does set up the child to have the money that is available. So there's really no block there for government benefits, right? You don't disqualify because it's not means tested. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into that second part, dealing with trust. But there's no means tested because they're not considering it a resource. The trust is created, the child is the beneficiary. You can fund the trust today, put money in, assets right now, or you can future fund it. Put money in through, leave assets in a will, or, leave other money, just name the special needs trust as the beneficiary for those assets. Family members can in. They can have gifts, they can have inheritance. Craig will talk a little bit about this one, a little bit in his part, where he talks about good intentions, bad consequences. And what can happen if somebody leaves money to an individual who's on or receiving government benefits, and now they're no longer eligible because the means test. They've got more assets than they can rely on. And you can fund the trust with a variety of different assets. We'll talk about that in a second. But one of the major ones that we talk about is life insurance. because there's no really other way to actually, and I don't want to steal Craig's portion of this, of really having that ability to say, I know this money's going to be available at the most, leveraged or I just blanked on the word, but that's okay.
Efficient.
Efficient. There we go, Craig. Thank you. I knew that was coming. Say, I'm all right.
Just trying to sell my thunder back. That's all.
There you go. All right. So the advantages of a third-party trust is that basically the assets are available for the individual, right? There is a trustee who controls that, but the trustee pretty much can make distributions for just about anything. There's really no limit to, and we'll talk about this when we get into the ABLE accounts, about the limitations about what can be used and what can be distributed, but there really isn't any limit. In the case of a first party trust, not third party, first party, there is a limit where it can be only used for basic needs. It can only go for food and shelter, essentially, from a first party trust. This is why you're limited in that first party trust. Any funds, if the individual passes away, then there can be contingent beneficiaries on the trust, and those funds can be distributed. There's no, and we'll talk about this with the other trust, what's known as a clawback provision or payback provision, the Medicaid. Medicaid does not get a payback provision of funds that are in the third-party trust, so all the assets are essentially protected. They're either going to go to the individual or to a named contingent beneficiary. That's what I just said. And that's the problem with a first party trust. And when we get into ABLE in a second, same thing with ABLE, is that there is that payback provision that goes on.
Tom, just because this does get a little bit confusing too, what the party is, right? So the party is just the person that the trust benefits, correct?
Correct.
Right. So
no, in the case of a third party trust, that's the person who's funding. It's the person who's funding.
Okay. So it's the funder or the fundee?
So it's the grantor of the trust. So the person who's funding the trust.
Okay. That determines whether it's first or third party.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I had a first party trust and I put the money in, that benefits me. If it's
you are the individual who has the disability in that situation.
And if it's a third party trust and I'm funding it, it's benefiting someone else.
It would have to be. That's how that would be set up.
Okay.
Right. And I'll talk about that in a second when I go through it.
All right.
I appreciate it.
It can get a little confusing when you start getting in.
Oh, I know. That's the problem. So really about the only disadvantage with third party trusts is costs. And for anybody who's ever, gone through this, I'm not going to, the conversation is that, you're talking about, several $1,000s to set up a trust, basically. There is ongoing maintenance. A lot of times, trust companies who might manage the accounts have minimums to fund into the trust. So that becomes a problem as well. If I don't have a lot of money, I can't set this trust up, but then I can't fund it either. So that is a, one problem or disadvantage to a third-party trust. The other types of trust, now Craig, this is getting to you in terms of talking through this, right? So that first-party trust, this is the child with the child's own assets. So why would that happen, right? Well, suppose that there was a medical, or a legal settlement where the child was awarded funds as part of that settlement. They would now have assets in their name. They don't want assets in their name because they're still getting government benefits. So they would need to set up this first party trust to offset. They might get an inheritance. We're going to talk a little bit about that with, those good consequence, bad outcomes, that somebody leaves money in their name and they wind up getting assets and need to put them into a first party trust. A pool trust and a state art trust, these are very similar type of arrangements. They are first party and third party the same. The funds are just the individuals who run these programs. They're done by nonprofit organizations, and they're just set up. funds are actually managed under a pooled arrangement, which doesn't mean everybody's funds are commingled. There's separate accounts for everybody. It's just there is a master trust company who's handling where those funds are placed and who's doing the management of those funds. You know, pooled arrangements are very, very economical. You know, they can be, you know, much less expensive to set up than a traditional third-party special needs trust. And so it's a conversation of what makes sense for what I'm trying to do or what I have available for assets to help me go through this.
They're a lot more fun in the summertime, right?
Yes. Right? So what did I do?
Dad joke there.
You threw me off there with that. Don't do that. So can you prepare without a trust? You know, absolutely, right? So, you know, you can distribute, leave just, you know, hey, it's in the will and I'm going to leave all my assets will go to my son or daughter who's got a disability. Well, okay, but, you know, they're going to be immediately disqualified from any benefits. And depending on how much you leave them, it may not last them for the rest of their lives. As we talked about, medical advances last for much longer. So you're not really doing what's in the best interest of the child in that situation. You can disinherit your child. This one, Craig and I don't really recommend or spend too much time in because ultimately the child just winds up in the same situation, is that there's no assets to them and they're trying to survive on just the government benefits. So not much of a real game plan there. You can leave the assets to a trusted family member. This is one that we talk about a lot because we hear it a lot from families. You know, his sister or his brother are going to take care of him. Great. All well and good. Best intentions, like we said. The problem is you have unforeseen consequences that can occur because any assets that you give to Johnny or Susie who are going to watch little Timmy, the problem is if they get into a situation, divorce settlement, they have a legal finding against them. Those assets can then be taken, even though they were intended for Timmy because they are now in little Johnny or Susie's name, they're no longer available to Timmy. So you wind up with an unforeseen consequence without realizing that, wait a minute, if we had just set this up, we would have gone through that. Besides, you don't know how long Johnny or Susie wants to be responsible for little Timmy, even though you've had that conversation and it's something that should be part of the conversation, but you just want to make sure. And then the last one is don't plan, right? You know, we're just, whatever's left over at the end of the line, that's what we're going to do. And we're going, you know, we're just going to take care of it at that point. And really it's, if you don't set anything up, you've planned. You've just got no plan. That's your plan. You just decided that, well, whatever's left is going to be left. And Craig will talk about that in a couple of minutes with what happens at the end of the line, you know, in terms of go through that. I'm going to quickly go through, you know, not all assets when we're talking about funding a trust or putting into a trust are created equal. You know, one of the things is people talk about, you know, their retirement account, and I've just named them as a beneficiary to my retirement account. Not necessarily a good thing because retirement accounts have minimum distributions that have to come out. The Secure Act in 2019 just changed how those distributions can occur and have now made it a 10-year time limit. So all the funds have to come out. But every year that those funds come out, they're going to create assets and create income for the individual, and now that's going to disqualify them. You can leave your house. Tremendous. Great thing. If they can continue to live there, okay. But if they can't continue to live there, what are they going to do with your house? Your house is not an ATM. Craig and I just had this conversation with an older couple, nothing to do with special needs. This is just, he owns a piece of property and doesn't want to sell it, but he needs the income. I'm like, well, you can't just, you know, go, you know, take the door off and go trade it into the bank for some money because it's not an ATM. You can't get any, you have to sell it or take out some sort of a financial arrangement, i.e. another mortgage or reverse mortgage to get access to the property itself. And the last one is securities, you know, which is fine and well and good, but securities react to the market. And if distributions are coming out to help offset somebody's income or needs, then those funds diminish, is what happens. Or the value of the funds can diminish as the market turns and happens. So while, a good thing to have, not necessarily great to be leaving that asset to an individual to count on for the rest of their life. All right, ABLE accounts. I'm almost done with my part. I'm going to finish up fairly quickly here so I can turn it over to Craig. So these are 529A ABLE accounts. Went into effect in 2014. But even though they were passed in 2014, the legislation, and like I said, the next time Stacy has us come over, we're gonna talk more about ABLE and go deeper dive into what ABLE is and how they work. But essentially, the law went into effect in 2014, but was not mandatory. You didn't have to do anything. So the first ABLE account really doesn't come into play until 2016, and even then, very, very limited. You had to live in the state where the ABLE account was set up. Now, that was all amended in 2017 as part of the Tax Cuts and Job Act, and the Able to Work and Financial Planning Act changed all that, sort of opened up it and said, we're going to treat these more like college education 529 accounts, and the fact that you don't have to live in the state. If you want to open an account, you can live, you can use just about anybody's state's 529A account. Some of the advantages, they're very easy to establish. Like I said, you can, it doesn't really matter where you are. Right now, there's about 41 states that have ABLE accounts, which is great. They don't count. So not only do they not count as a resource, an asset, but they don't count as income. So means tested, they block any of that means tested. And just like a college savings plan, the funds go tax-free. So there's never a distribution that's going to create a taxable event out of an ABLE. The disadvantage is the disability has to have been prior to age 26. Now, there is currently legislation taking place right now that's going to try to move that to 46. Because if you think of this, especially in the blind and low vision community, a lot of that doesn't take place till later on in life. Mm-hmm. So they're trying to make legislation to move that more to the disability not occurring to age 46. There is a limit. It's a limit of $100,000 that can be in the account. The minute it goes over $100,000, now becomes means. So the adage is, if you've got into the 90,000 range inside an ABLE account, start spending some of the money. There is that Medicaid payback provision. That is part of the thing. There is a clawback. If the child, the individual, the owner of the account passes away, then Medicaid will step in. Right? So who can contribute? It's just about anybody. Right? So there is a limit though. You can only put in $15,000 a year total per the beneficiary. So, grandma, the aunts, uncles, everybody total that can go into the account, 15,000. The beneficiary, the individual, if they are working, can also contribute, however. And for this year, it stayed the same. It's $12,490 is the amount that can go in, that the individual can contribute if they have income and they are working, right? So it can be used for a lot of different expenses. You don't have to live in the state. And one of the things that we talk about is, you can open a 529, a regular college savings plan for your child. You may not know at a young age whether the child's going to continue on to schooling or not. And if at the time your child reaches that age, makes that decision, you decide they're not going to go to college, you can transfer to a 529A. There's no charge, there's no cost, there's no consequence to doing that. Within that 15,000 year limit, that's the only part of that. And then what are QDEs? These are qualifying disability expenses. These are the categories that you can remove money from an ABLE account and not have it count against any of the means tested programs. And you can see there's a wide scope of expenses in there: housing, basic livings, health, wellness, pension, transportation, job coaching, all sorts of things that go along with it. Some of this, when we get into the part about trust and ABLE accounts, and the next time that Stacy has us in, we'll talk about the limitations that a special needs trust has versus the limitations that an ABLE account when it comes to paying for some of these food and shelter items, because money distributed out of a special needs trust can trigger a reduction in benefits if they are paying for those services. So it's something to be careful. All right, now I'm going to finish up. I'm going to turn this over to Craig, and Craig, just let me know when you want me to sort of move you forward in time.
Will do. Thank you for that too. So this comes into be a big question. We start talking about special needs planning is how much money am I going to need? And that is a big question depending on what kind of benefits are being received, kind of what kind of services are needed. So that's a whole process in itself is trying to figure out what to leave behind. But the bigger issue is how to do that, how to leave that money behind. As Tom had alluded to earlier, there's different methods, there's different plans. One of those is to have no plan and just whatever's left fills in the gap, hopefully. Sometimes that's not the case. So one thing we do talk a little bit about is how life insurance can fill in the gap. And the reason life insurance is popular for filling in that gap is because life insurance is a guaranteed funding vehicle once you have it in place. So it's something that can be separated from your normal assets and expenses and be just earmarked specifically for the benefit of the child with special need. So we want to move forward a little bit. So once again, you want to have enough to cover anticipated future expenses. And also depends on what your family's budget is and the amount that the amount that needs unfulfilled income potential, the amount that makes sense to you. So like I said, this is different for every family. Every family has different resources. But once again, life insurance is a nice segue because it allows you to have an asset specifically earmarked for that child. You want to move forward? So one thing about life insurance is that you can set up regular premiums to ensure predictability. So you know how much money is going to be going into the trust regardless of what the circumstances going forward change. Money is available immediately upon death. This is another big thing. So let's say you decided that in order for my child to live a quality of life, they need a certain amount of money. Let's say, just for sake of argument, that's $500,000. And you decide, well, I'm going to start saving. By the time I'm 60, I should have that money put away, but you're in your 30s now. Well, if you pass away now, they're going to be stuck with whatever you managed to save. Where the life insurance would kick in immediately if you died for the full amount. And it's once again, same concept that's available from the very first premium payment. So once that goes in force, it's available. And you can name the trust as a beneficiary to help preserve those assets or those benefits for the child who's receiving government benefits. So it doesn't kick them off as long as it goes into a third-party trust. So meeting your needs, premium payments are not wasted. It's simple to change the beneficiary. Whole life accumulates at cash value. So when we talk about life insurance funding the need, what we're really talking about here is whole life insurance or permanent insurance. There's two different types that we go into in other presentations. But basically it's term, which is temporary insurance, which is usually over a period of 10 or 20 or 30 years. But at some point that insurance ends. Where permanent insurance doesn't end until the person passes away, so long as the premium payments are made. The nice part about that, once again, is while the premiums can be a little higher up front, nothing is wasted because it goes into cash value. So if somewhere down the road you decided your child wasn't going to need this benefit, that cash can come back to you, or you can change the beneficiary on those policies to somebody else. Move forward. Okay, so a will. A will is a basic foundation that every family should have, but especially those who have a child with special needs. What it basically does is it gives you the critically important information about who should be the guardian, how assets should be divided based on what your wishes are. Okay, want to go forward? So when you talk about a will, you want to talk about how you want to divide the assets and who's going to get what. So if you have one child, provide care for, then it's fairly simple. Everything's straightforward and going to that one child. If you have two or more children, and some of your children do not have a special need, typical children, then you may be dividing the assets based, on how you feel the need is going to be for each one of those children going forward. And like I said, the life insurance solution policy can provide a solution by helping you distribute assets and provide for everybody equitably. So like I said, aside from like when you remainder asset like your house, the house has to be sold. Something has to happen in order for that cash to become available. In a life insurance policy, it's just cash that's moving. And a nice thing, and we'll get into a little bit later, if you actually want to move forward, Tom, talk about how different assets are distributed. Oh, okay, so we'll go to guardianship right now. So guardianship is the only way I can make sure that his mom or I will be able to advocate for what is necessary so he will be safe and happy to secure this. I must prove to a court that my son is incapable of making decisions on his own. My wife and I must also choose someone to accept responsibility when we are no longer alive and who we can trust to carry out our wishes. This is by Michael Giangregorio. He's Autism Services Chair in the LI chapter. So, what's that?
The Long Island chapter.
Long Island chapter. Okay, I knew it wasn't Louisiana, right? So naming a guardian. Naming a guardian is very important because you're going to be deciding who, if you're not around, is going to be caring for that child. So a will also allows you to name a guardian. If you don't do that, what happens is the family court's going to make that decision for you. All right. So you want to make sure that whoever you choose, it's someone who is willing and able to play that role. So when you think about naming a guardian, consider these important steps. One, take your time, because it's a big decision. Include your child if you can, if they're old enough, and share the difficulties and the rewards with the person who's going to be the guardian, because it's going to be a big responsibility, but they want to know what are the positives that come out of that as well. And there are both. And make sure you spend a little time together before something should happen. So if the child is familiar with that person, God forbid anything should happen to you. So if you do not have a will, don't worry, because the state will take care of it. All right. You have a will, whether you like it or not. It's called probate. The problem with not having a will is high cost of attorney's fees and all that for getting your family to put your estate through probate. Assets are divided entirely on relationships. So whether you wanted this person or that person to get your assets will no longer be your choice. It's going to be based on how they were related to you. And the court, once again, when we talked about guardianship just a minute ago, the court is going to decide who gets to be the guardian of your child based on who decides to step forward. So the person you wanted to be responsible may not even know your wishes and may never step forward. And then the other thing is you're going through family court, you have a judge who's got about 10 or 15 minutes to hear your case and decide who's going to be the guardianship of your child for the rest of their life. So if you have control over that, you want to make sure you have control over that by putting a will in place. Encourage family members to create wills as well. So if you know, that's important because let's say you're already taking care of a child who has special needs. What if you had a brother or a sister or an aunt or uncle who decided in their will or not to be in your will that they passed away and left their children with someone needing to be their guardian, but there was nothing created for that. So you just want to make sure that that's all in place. And just make sure you also know that intestacy laws can vary from state to state. What's true here in Massachusetts may not be what's true in Alabama or California or Alaska. So make sure that you're, because all assets pass through trust. And a will naming the special needs trust is a simple solution. So once again, it's about, making sure that the trust is incorporated into the will, that it's stated is where the monies are going to be going, if it's for that intended purpose. And this is also very important to know what passes by will and what does not. So one of the things that Tom and I do with every client we work with is we go through their beneficiary designations. And this is important for a few different reasons. One, because you may have bought a policy like life insurance many years ago, and the person who was your beneficiary is no longer alive or relevant in your life. So you got divorced, maybe they passed away, maybe you just don't like them anymore, who knows? IRAs and other qualified retirement plans, once again, whoever you put down as a beneficiary, let's say you started an IRA before you got married, 15 years later, your mother's still the beneficiary on your IRA. You never changed it over to your spouse, right? Mm-hmm. So if you pass away, well, your mother's happy, she gets the money, but your spouse gets nothing, right? Well, she's not happy, but yes.
Greg, isn't there also a concern about if I name what's it called? Is it Persterpes or something where I've just named all of my kids basically, after my wife.
Right. So that could, if it goes per stirpes, yeah, that could have an effect on the lineage of the person who's the beneficiary. So let's say you left it to your brother, the beneficiary was your brother, and your brother had a special needs child, but your brother passed away. Well, the money, if it's a per stirpes, would go to the special needs child. And if they don't have a way to deal with that, then it can knock their benefits out. So yeah, that's a concern from that respect.
That could carries forward on that, and I like I said, that could be that unforeseen consequence. I didn't even know it because I didn't never look at my beneficiary.
Right. Well, the bigger issue though is that the beneficiary passed away, and now there is no existing beneficiary, and it's heading back to the estate. Now you're back in the probate, and that's not what you wanted. It could just be, you and I have dealt with a few cases like that, Tom, where this is just a nightmare now because you got to go through all the legal process and deal with probate and all the
right. And the court can turn around and actually say the individual with the disability is the rightful heir to this money, and they've got to get this money.
Or even, well, the other thing too, you may have outstanding liabilities, and now it's open to creditors. Now nobody gets any money. Well, the creditors do, but family members don't.
Yeah.
Well, were we through all those?
Yeah.
Okay, we can move on then. So the other thing too is when you're looking at beneficiaries, there's two important things. There's your primary beneficiary. So that's the one you'd want to see get the benefits from those assets if something happened to you. The contingent beneficiary is important to be named because if the primary is either not around or unable for some reason, let's say you named the primary beneficiary at the time who could get those assets, say like once again, so you got a brother or a sister, but then in the interim, they became disabled and were now on benefits. Well, now by being the primary beneficiary, they could be kicked off, right? So you may want to have a contingent beneficiary, someone else who can receive those assets. So it's always important to have another one in line so it doesn't end up going to your estate should somebody refuse or be unable to take those benefits. This is really important. This was Tom's talked about and mentioned a few times earlier about unforeseen negative consequences of a positive act. So your family decides they want to give an asset to you or your child, especially because they want to help out. They want to be that good uncle, that good aunt, grandparent. And they will unintentionally they intentionally will it to your child, not understanding that any gifts from that could disqualify them from the government benefits. So it's really important, and I know this is very difficult from one family to the next, depending on your circumstance, but communication goes a real long way in making sure that there's no negative impact on those sort of good intentions from your family. The other really important thing, and we tell this to every client we work with again, is that the financial planning process is not about one individual, whether an attorney, accountant, or your financial professional. It's really about having all of those professionals in place working together for yours and your child's interest. So it's making sure you have the attorney, and the accountant and the financial professional, they're all on the same page. You want to have a good financial team. And it's not only just important about their knowledge, which is absolutely the basis for why you want to pick somebody, but also the relationship you can form with them and how comfortable you are. Because if you're not comfortable going back and having these conversations with these people and not comfortable in the advice that they give you, then you're never going to move forward. You're not going to take the advice. You're just going to be floundering. You also want to make sure that you get people on the same page so you don't have to decide which one's telling you the right thing and which one is not.
Sorry, I jumped forward. I thought you stopped.
You can be doing it a couple times. That's fine. I'm just trying to keep You're just trying to throw me off. I know. It's okay. All right. So a letter of intent, passing on your knowledge. This is a letter of intent. Well, it's really just I like to say, if you ever watched Robbie the Robot, the robot came with a set of instructions. I always wish my children came with an owner's manual, right? So you can figure out, what am I supposed to do as a parent here? But this is kind of your chance to create what we call a little bit of a booklet or a how-to-do with your child, talking about their daily routine, dislikes and fears, their friends, social life, all the important information about their doctors, case managers, all of that, the nuts and bolts, all the legal and financial stuff. But this is really about if something you're not there to talk or advocate for your child, there's something that's going to speak to, what your child's needs, wants, and assets are. So this is important whether you passed away, but it's also just as important as if you say, just going to take some respite. You're going to go on a vacation for a week or two, and they're going to stay with an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent. This gives you all that history about the child, so they don't have to try to guess. And this is really important to keep this up to date as well. Like I said, Tom and I have teenage daughters, and every week it's something different that's their new favorite. Right? I can't keep up. I try, but it just is what it is. So it's going to be the same with a special needs child as well. I mean, they're children, just like anybody else. They're people, just like anybody else. Their needs, want, they like, everything keeps changing. Their doctors change, their therapies change, legal information changes. So this is something you don't want to just do once and leave it. You probably want to, I think Tom has said in the past, but picking maybe the child's birthday or some kind of anniversary date like that is a good time to stop and revisit this and just make sure
it's something that we recommend as far as doing on an annual basis and just going back over the past year. And like Craig said, keeping this more as a growing or accumulating type of document. I mean, the letter of intent is not a legal document, but it is definitely looked at, like Craig said, as that sort of guidebook to the wants and desires that you have for your child if you're no longer there or not able to voice that. Absolutely.
Now you can jump to the next screen if you want. So caring for the caregivers. This is something that I think doesn't get talked about enough. Like I've gone to lots and lots of different workshops and webinars and back before COVID, trade shows. And everything is really focused around the child, which it should be. I mean, this is the person you're trying to take care of. But the big thing that people don't think about enough is caring for the people who are providing that care, right? Because if you're not in a good physical, mental, or financial state, it's very difficult to take care of someone else's needs, okay? So we talked a little bit about caring for yourself. So consider taking a little bit of time for yourself, that 15-minute break, once again, that letter of intent so you can get some respite care. You may find exercising, mind and well-being, which we're actually going to be doing another presentation on that sometime. Seek out support to help cope with frustration. This is like having good family groups or good support groups through different organizations, and there are plenty of fantastic ones out there. We work with a lot of them. And also afford yourself regular quality time with your spouse and other children, because those relationships are very, very important too. And sometimes they get sidelined because we're just so intent on what we have to do on a day-to-day basis. But once again, build that strong support system. And remember that other people are out there, and you're not alone in what you're going through. 1 in, I think, 5 people in this country have a disability. So it is a very large network of people who are going through very common issues. So it's okay to reach out. It's okay to need help. And make sure, it's good to have a place to go when you do feel in a jam or overwhelmed, and those feelings do come up. And the other thing too is don't just go to people when everything's down, but go to them when things are fantastic. Oh my God, look at this thing they accomplished that I didn't think they could do, or this big walk they do that for a fundraiser that went so well, or look at this relationship that they forged that I didn't think was going to happen. All those positives are very important to share as well. Now you can move forward.
Touching on the caring for the caregivers and talking about, taking the time out for them to do what they need to do, kind of reminds me, my dad had this thing when we'd fly. He'd be like, oh, no, you have to take the oxygen first. And I'm like, no, that would be awful. I would definitely offer it to other people. He's like, but the thing is, you can't take care of anyone until you take care of yourself. And it crystallized so much as, my son kind of stepped into this, and this became a thing in my life. And it was interesting because, again, you said a lot of ABA therapy, because my son happens to have autism, is a lot of ABA therapy is the kids are working for rewards and things like that. And in reality, you almost have to set up your own set of goals and things like that and reward yourself along the way. And you have to remember to do that because it's so important to just be able to, like you said, staying in that calm space and things like that so you can deal with what you need to deal with. And I loved how you just put that in there. So I just wanted to comment on it a little bit.
Thank you. I always feel like any good parent, no matter how good a job you do, always feels guilty, right? You always feel like you could have done more. You could, I should have done more.
Worst.
Everything that goes bad is my fault. Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
So when you're dealing with even a more emotional issue with dealing with a child who needs more care than most, there's additional guilt. And then
Mhm.
I want to take time to do this for myself. Well, I can't do that. That's terrible for me to go on a vacation.
Be
Well,
selfish, yeah, buy a
so
chip and
selfish, right? But if you don't do those things for yourself, those are the things you've forgotten about. And those are the reasons, like said, if you don't put time into those relationships that you had prior to your children, but also with your other children, then those things
Mhm.
kind of go away, and then there's less
Yeah,
structure. So it's
yeah.
really important to treat the whole family, not just that one individual person.
Absolutely.
And the other thing too, this is more on the financial side, but also on the care side, is today 70% of adults are 65 and older, and it will
Yeah.
require some kind of extended care or special needs. Now, this is a thing that can really derail a lot of the special needs planning as far as putting money into a trust, especially if you're dealing with remaining assets.
hmm
Because care is very, very expensive, whether it's at home or in a facility. So sometimes we know there's different solutions out there that can help deal with that. And life insurance and other different products are hybrids now that can solve multiple issues with fewer and fewer pots of money and make it try to be more efficient across the board. So it's very important to make sure you're addressing these things proactively rather than reactively, because
Yep.
it's something that can really throw you off the rails. And how many parents, people 65 or older who have a disabled child, their children are living into their 50s, 60s, 70s.
Exactly.
So you're in that I can't care for myself, how do I care for them mode? So it's really good to make sure you've got a plan for that way in advance.
It's so true because then a lot of these kids, like you said, they are staying at home. It's not like they can go into perhaps a group home or other like shared living kind of pieces and things like that. And in so many ways, the institutions being gone are good, but then, those are also things that people had depended on for years and years too for that support when they themselves reached, an age where they can no longer care for their children. So a lot of these things are just so important to really kind of, really make sure you have your eyes on and you're really talking to those professionals, people like Tom, people like Craig, people, that or that you're already working with to really get these pieces in place because you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I mean, a year ago, I'm looking at pictures on Facebook recently of like, oh, we were a Blue Man Group, we were doing this, we were doing that. And, here we are like in complete lockdown. And who would have thought this last year at this time, something like this could have happened? And it's the same thing. I mean, even when you have a child with special needs, oftentimes you don't know you're going to have a child with special needs. It isn't always seen like in utero and things like that. And then it's all of a sudden like, oh my God, what do I do? Or God forbid, somebody's in an accident and they end up with TBI. Then what? Traumatic brain injury, for those of you who don't know what I'm saying. You just don't know what's going to happen next. So you really have to make sure you're really making the correct moves. And what was good 20, 30, 40 years ago for your parents when they were doing their investing isn't necessarily the same today anyway, let alone adding a special needs child or two into that mix. It just is a completely different, it's a different bunch of vehicles. As before, it might have been one vehicle or another. Now there's a plethora of different, revenue streams and saving streams and things like that you have to be aware of in so many different ways. So I think it's really, really important. And, like I said, I love what you're talking about. So I'm going to let you continue on. Sorry.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, no. So, this is just wrapping up and final thoughts really is that, it's as Craig and Stacy have both said, you're not alone. Right. There are resources, there are support groups, there are others who are on a similar path, just not the same journey. Right. When we talk about, that future funding thought process, look at those expenses and try to project those out. Understand how government benefit works, understand what is means tested and how you can disqualify somebody and whether a special needs trust or an ABLE account makes sense. Right? We always talk about future funding. You heard us say it a bunch of times because there is no more efficient way to say money is going to be set aside and available out in the future than with a life insurance contract, because then I know it's going to fund the trust and I don't have to worry about it. Right? And caring for the caregivers is very, very important, as Greg just went through. This is Greg and I, and this is us having at our more fun and relaxed times. we tend to get out there, but that gives you some of our contact information. I know it'll probably come up on the screen later, but we always like to share this a little bit about who we are and what we do. As Stacy had mentioned, we do have a couple of things. One, we actually have a newsletter that we put out every month. We call it the Connections Update. The Connections Update, basically just the communities throughout sort of the region and the area right in Massachusetts and New England, those organizations that have events that are coming up, whether those are trainings, conferences, fundraisers, etc. We just gather them all up, and monthly we put that out. It's over the next 2 months, which just talks a little bit about what's going on. But if you want to get on that, it's easy to do. You can just send us an email. It's info@ariesfoundation.org. info@ariesfoundation.org, and just request. Or if you go to the webpage, the ariesfoundation.org, there's a sign up for the newsletter, and we can put you on that. As Stacy alluded, we do have an offer. Along with what I mentioned, this presentation itself is actually set up in a step-by-step guidebook that does walk parents through. These are all the things that you should, as you're in your journey or path, be thinking about, and it comes with checklists and ways to sort of navigate and go through all of that. We make it available. There's no cost. There's no charge for that. It's certainly something that we can send out. Again, if you send it to that email address, info@Aries Foundation, we can get that out to you. It's a PDF, so we can certainly send it out. You can be part of that monthly newsletter like I just talked about. One of the things we do make available is the ability to meet with us and have a complimentary consultation. We're not going to charge you for it. We're going to try to help you, connect you. Like I said, the Special Needs Resource Network, we got a lot of different professionals in there and can help you and access and connect to all of those individuals. So that's really what it's all about. It's trying to get to all of that information, and we're happy to do that. That's what we try to do as far as all of it.
Yeah, and Tom, one thing I found too with a lot of people, whether they have a special needs child or not, is they tend to allow life to get in the way of doing planning. Sometimes that's intentional because no one wants to talk about financial issues. But it's really important, especially if you have a special needs child, to be ahead of the game on these things. Life
Absolutely.
insurance is qualification based. You can't just buy it because you want it. You've got to qualify for it. So it's the longer you wait, the less opportunities will be out there. And also,
like you said, the more opportunity to deplenish or have the funds not available.
Right, and knowledge is power. You don't know what you're not getting, what
Right.
benefits are out there that you don't know about. You're so
Right.
busy on your day-to-day life that you can't keep up with everything, and that's what professionals do. They stay up to date on those things.
Well, and that's all we have for today. I'm going to say again, thank you, Stacy, and as far as having us on, but I'm going to stop my share and say this was great, and we certainly appreciate it.
Now, quick question, the parent guidebook that you were talking about that they can get a copy of, now is that a physical copy or is that digital?
So it's digital today.
Okay.
We do have physical copies, like if we're at a conference or something that we hand out. But today we've got it in a digital version that we can send out, because it just with COVID and everything else, it just became easier to do it that way.
Absolutely, and it's PC or Mac, it doesn't matter, right?
It doesn't matter. Same thing with the guidebook, with that roadmap. It's the same thing. It's a digital
Okay, great.
copy. Yeah.
But if for some reason you have an issue where you don't have access to digital, you're watching this on public access and you don't have a computer, reach out to us and we'll see what we can do to help you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Well, thank you both for being here with us on Connections. We really appreciate it. And until next time, keep unity in the community. Have a great day. Bye-bye.